I was 3 days away from running out of propane when Deborah Simmons from the Homeowner Association knocked on my door with that pinched expression she always wore when she was about to ruin someone's day. Xavier, we need to discuss your commercial vehicle situation, she said, clutching her clipboard like it was a holy text. She was maybe 50, with that particular haircut that somehow all HOA board presidents seem to share. Blonde with chunky highlights and cut in severe layers that framed her perpetually disapproving face. I stood in the doorway of my house in Bloomington, Minnesota, a place where winter wasn't just cold but genuinely dangerous. It was mid-December, and the weather forecast was already predicting one of the worst cold snaps we'd seen in years. Commercial vehicle. Deborah, I don't own any commercial vehicles. She made a show of checking her clipboard. The propane delivery truck that parks in your driveway every month. Multiple residents have complained about the noise and the unsightly appearance. That's not my truck. That's the delivery service from Midwest Propane. They fill my tank. I pointed toward the side of my house where my 500-gallon propane tank sat, partially screened by some evergreen shrubs. I'd bought this house 2 years ago specifically because it was outside the city's natural gas lines, and I loved the efficiency and cost-effectiveness of propane for heating, cooking, and hot water. Regardless, Section 8.4 of the HOA covenant clearly states that commercial vehicles are not permitted to park on residential property for longer than 30 minutes. These deliveries take approximately 45 minutes according to Mrs. Patterson next door. I felt my jaw tighten. Deborah, that's for residents parking commercial vehicles, not service vehicles. By that logic, you'd have to ban garbage trucks, moving vans, and delivery trucks. Those are essential services covered under different provisions. Propane delivery is considered a luxury upgrade, not a necessity, since the majority of homes in Meadowbrook Estates use electric heating. Electric? Are you serious? Do you have any idea how expensive electric heating is in Minnesota? And propane isn't a luxury. It's literally how I heat my house and cook my food. She gave me that tight smile that never reached her eyes. The board has voted, Mr. Xavier. 4-1. Effective immediately, propane delivery trucks are banned from entering Meadowbrook Estates. You'll need to make alternative arrangements, perhaps smaller containers that you can transport yourself. A 500-gallon tank can't be filled with portable containers. That's insane. And even if I could, you know how many trips that would take, how dangerous it would be. That sounds like a personal problem. The decision is final. If we see a propane truck in your driveway again, you'll be fined $200 per occurrence. Good day, Mr. Xavier. She turned on her heel and walked down my front path, her sensible heels clicking against the concrete. I stood there in disbelief, watching her climb into her pristine white SUV. This was exactly the kind of petty tyranny I'd heard about with HOAs, but had somehow convinced myself wouldn't be an issue in this neighborhood. The previous board had been reasonable, focused on actual community improvements rather than nitpicking. But Deborah had been elected president 6 months ago, and since then, she'd been on a crusade to enforce every obscure rule in the book while inventing new interpretations of existing ones. I went back inside and immediately called Midwest Propane. The customer service representative, a friendly guy named Tom, listened to my situation with growing concern. That's a new one, he admitted. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never heard of an HOA banning propane deliveries. Are you sure they can do that? Apparently they voted on it. I don't know if it's legal, but she seemed pretty confident. Well, here's the thing. We're scheduled to deliver to you on Thursday. You're sitting at about 22% capacity right now, which with this cold snap they're predicting, that gives you maybe a week and a half tops if you're conservative with usage. But if temperatures really drop like they're saying, could be less. What are my options? Honestly, not many. We can't deliver in smaller trucks because we don't have smaller trucks. All our delivery vehicles are the same size. And those portable tanks you could get at a hardware store, you're looking at maybe 100 pounds of propane max, which is less than 24 gallons. Your tank holds 500 gallons. Even if you ran out completely and wanted to fill it with portable tanks, that's more than 20 trips, and each tank costs about $60 to fill. You'd be spending over $1,000 to do what we could do for $200. This is ridiculous. Look, I'll tell you what I can do. I can reach out to our regional manager, see if maybe we can get some kind of exemption or talk to the HOA directly. Sometimes when we explain the safety issues and the practicality, they back down. Give me until tomorrow. I agreed and hung up, then immediately started researching HOA law in Minnesota. What I found was frustrating. HOAs had broad authority to create and enforce rules, but those rules had to be reasonable and consistently applied. Banning a specific type of service vehicle seemed like it could be challenged, but the legal process would take time and money I didn't necessarily have. The next morning, I woke to an email from Deborah that had been sent to all residents of Meadowbrook Estates. The subject line read, "Important update regarding commercial vehicle policy." The email was vintage Deborah, long-winded, self-righteous, and filled with references to property values and community standards. She made it sound like propane trucks were some kind of blight on the neighborhood, comparing them to having an oil refinery in your backyard. She emphasized that the board was committed to maintaining the upscale appearance of Meadowbrook Estates, and that residents who refused to comply with board decisions were undermining everyone's investments. What really got me was the last paragraph. "We understand some residents may experience temporary inconvenience as they transition away from propane systems. However, the board encourages those residents to consider this an opportunity to upgrade to more modern, environmentally friendly electric systems. Several local contractors have expressed willingness to provide quotes for conversions." So that was it. This wasn't really about commercial vehicles at all. Someone on the board, probably Deborah herself, had a connection to electrical contractors and was trying to drum up business. Or maybe she just had a personal vendetta against propane for some inexplicable reason. Tom from Midwest Propane called me back around noon. Bad news. I spoke with our regional manager and she actually contacted your HOA directly, spoke with a Deborah Simmons. Let me guess, it didn't go well. She basically told us that if any of our trucks entered Meadowbrook Estates, she'd have them towed for trespassing and fine you $200. Our legal team says we can't knowingly violate the HOA rules, even if we think they're wrong. It's a liability issue. I'm really sorry. So I'm just screwed. The only thing I can suggest is you get a lawyer and challenge the rule. We'd be happy to provide supporting documentation about safety, industry standards, that kind of thing. But until the rule is overturned, we can't make deliveries. I thanked him and hung up, then sat at my kitchen table trying to figure out my next move. Outside, the temperature was already dropping. The forecast now showed temperatures plummeting to -15 by the weekend, with wind chills potentially reaching -40. This was serious, life-threatening cold, the kind where exposed skin could get frostbite in minutes and pipes could freeze and burst. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which according to the community website was scheduled for that Thursday evening. In the meantime, I started documenting everything: the emails, the phone calls, the weather forecasts. I also reached out to my neighbors to see if anyone else used propane. Turns out, 2 other houses in the development did. The Mitchells, 3 houses down, had propane for a backup generator and fireplace. And the Johnsons, on the next street over, had a full propane system like mine. I contacted both of them. Gary Mitchell was annoyed but not overly concerned. We mainly use ours for the generator and fireplace insert. It's not our primary heat source, so we can probably go a whole year without a delivery if we had to. But yeah, this rule is stupid. Frank Johnson, on the other hand, was in the same boat I was. I called them yesterday when I got the email, he told me when I rang his doorbell. He was an older guy, probably in his 70s, retired and living on a fixed income. I explained that I'm at 30% capacity and need a delivery soon. You know what Deborah told me? She said I should have planned better and that ignorance of HOA rules wasn't an excuse. Did you know about this rule before? Of course not, because it didn't exist until last week when they invented it. I've lived here for 8 years, had propane deliveries every 2 months like clockwork. Never been an issue until now. We agreed to both attend Thursday's meeting and present a unified front. In the meantime, I did what I could to conserve propane. I lowered my thermostat to 62 degrees and put on extra layers. I took shorter showers. I used my microwave instead of my stove when possible. But with the temperature outside dropping daily, the furnace was running constantly, just to maintain even that lower temperature. Thursday evening arrived with a bitter cold wind that cut through my heavy coat as I walked to the community center where HOA meetings were held. The parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, Deborah's email had generated interest, though probably not the kind she'd wanted. The community center was a modest building at the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates, featuring a meeting room, a small gym, and a room with vending machines that passed for a social area. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and several rows of folding chairs for residents. About 30 people had shown up, which was about 3 times the normal attendance. Deborah called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Good evening, everyone. I see we have quite a turnout tonight. Before we begin with the formal agenda, I want to address what I assume is the reason for this attendance. The board's decision regarding commercial vehicle restrictions has generated some feedback." "Feedback?" someone called out from the back. "You mean complaints?" Deborah's lips thinned. "The board welcomes resident input, but I'll remind everyone that there's a proper procedure. Comments from residents are heard at the end of the meeting during the open forum section. But we're here to talk about the propane truck ban," another voice said. I recognized Mrs. Henderson from down the street. "Why do we have to sit through an hour of budget reports first?" "Because that's how we conduct business in an orderly fashion, Mrs. Henderson. If you don't wish to participate in the full meeting, you're welcome to leave and check the minutes online." The room settled into a frustrated silence as Deborah proceeded with the regular agenda. She went through financial reports that Marcus had prepared, discussed some landscaping bids, and addressed a complaint about someone's holiday decorations being up too early. It was clearly a power play, making everyone wait, establishing that she controlled the meeting. Finally, after nearly an hour, she opened the floor for resident comments. I was first to raise my hand. "Yes, Mr. Xavier," Deborah acknowledged, her tone suggesting she'd been expecting this. I stood, trying to keep my voice level and reasonable. "I'm here to formally request that the board reconsider its decision to ban propane delivery trucks. This rule is effectively making it impossible for me, and at least 2 other residents to heat our homes. With the extreme cold weather approaching, this is a safety issue. The board considered safety when making this decision, Deborah replied. Propane is a flammable gas, and having large trucks carrying it through our residential streets presents its own safety concerns. Propane trucks have been making deliveries safely for decades. There are strict regulations governing these deliveries, and the alternative, having residents transport their own propane in smaller containers in personal vehicles, is actually far more dangerous. Richard, the vice president, leaned forward. Mr. Xavier, I think you're being a bit dramatic. No one is telling you that you can't have propane. We're simply asking that you arrange for deliveries in a way that doesn't involve large commercial trucks parking in driveways for extended periods. But that's not physically possible with a 500-gallon tank, I said. The delivery trucks can't be smaller because the tanks they carry are the minimum size needed to make residential delivery economically viable. And manually filling a 500-gallon tank with portable containers would take over 20 trips and cost 5 times as much. Frank Johnson stood up. I'd like to add that I'm in the same situation. I'm on a fixed income, and propane is by far the most affordable heating option for me. Forcing me to switch to electric would increase my heating costs by at least 50%. That's not a minor inconvenience. That's a financial hardship. Patricia, the secretary, actually looked sympathetic. I wasn't aware that anyone would face such difficulties. When Deborah brought this proposal to the board, she characterized it as addressing a nuisance complaint about noise and unsightly vehicles. She didn't mention it would prevent anyone from heating their homes. Deborah shot Patricia a sharp look. The board voted on this measure after proper discussion. 4 members voted in favor. Who voted against it? Someone in the audience asked. Jennifer, the youngest board member, raised her hand slightly. I did, for exactly these reasons. I felt we needed more information about the impact on residents before implementing such a broad restriction. And you were outvoted, Deborah said firmly. That's how democratic processes work. The majority has spoken. But the majority of the board doesn't represent the majority of residents, Mrs. Henderson called out. How many people even knew this was being considered? It wasn't in the agenda preview you sent out. Deborah shuffled her papers. It fell under new business, which is always included in our agendas. New business that you didn't specify, another resident pointed out. This feels like you pushed this through without giving the community a chance to weigh in. The meeting was getting heated, with multiple conversations breaking out. Deborah banged her gavel repeatedly. Order, we will have order. The decision has been made. If residents wish to formally challenge it, they can follow the procedure outlined in the CC and Articles, which requires a petition signed by 40% of homeowners and a special election. Until such time, the rule stands. I sat back down, frustrated but not surprised. Getting 40% of homeowners to sign anything was a high bar, especially in a community where most people were apathetic about HOA politics. Still, it might be worth trying. As the meeting broke up, several residents approached me and Frank, expressing support. A few offered to sign a petition if we created one. But I could also see others leaving quickly, clearly not wanting to get involved in a dispute with the board. Outside, the temperature had dropped further. My car's thermometer read 8 degrees. I drove home with a sense of dread. According to my propane gauge, I was down to 18% capacity. At this rate, I'd be out of propane within a week, maybe sooner if the temperature kept dropping. The next morning, Friday, I started drafting a petition. I also called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Rachel Simmons, and no relation to Deborah, she assured me with a laugh when I expressed concern. HOAs have broad authority, but not unlimited authority, Rachel explained during our consultation. A rule that effectively prevents you from accessing a necessary utility could potentially be challenged as unreasonable, but the process takes time. Even if we filed immediately, we're looking at weeks or months before any resolution. I don't have weeks. I have days before I run out of propane. Then my honest advice: start working on that petition and also document everything. Every communication with the HOA, temperature readings, propane levels, the cost of alternatives, everything. If this gets to court, you'll want a solid record. In the meantime, do you have any options for temporary heat if your propane runs out? Space heaters, I guess. But running enough space heaters to heat a whole house in Minnesota winter, my electric bill would be insane. Plus, it's not even safe. That's a fire hazard and could overload the circuits. Document all of that too. The more you can show actual harm and the unreasonableness of the alternatives, the stronger your case. I spent Friday and Saturday going door to door with my petition. The response was mixed. Some people signed immediately, outraged on my behalf. Others were sympathetic but hesitant to go against the board. And a few flat out refused, saying they supported the board's efforts to maintain standards. By Sunday evening, I had signatures from about 25% of the homeowners. Not enough, and I was running out of time. The weather forecast was now showing the temperature would drop to -12 on Monday night and -18 on Tuesday. My propane gauge read 14%. Monday morning, I woke to a house that felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat. It was set at 62, but the actual temperature was 59. The furnace was struggling to keep up with the cold. Outside, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind of sky that promised bitter cold. The wind had a knife edge to it, and even walking to my car to get the newspaper left my face stinging. I went to work, a job I'd been neglecting while dealing with this HOA crisis. I worked as a software developer for a company in downtown Minneapolis, a 40-minute drive from Bloomington. All day, I found it hard to concentrate. I kept checking the weather updates on my phone, watching the temperature steadily drop. By the time I left work at 5, it was already -3 degrees. The sun was setting, and the temperature would only go lower. I stopped at a hardware store and bought 2 space heaters just in case. They were expensive, the good ones, but I figured I'd need them soon. When I got home, I immediately checked my propane gauge. It read 11%. I did some quick math. At the current rate of consumption, with the furnace running almost constantly, I probably had 2 days left, maybe 3 if I really pushed it and lowered the thermostat even further. That night, I barely slept. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Despite the furnace running constantly, the house felt cold, drafts sneaking in around doors and windows. I kept thinking about what would happen when the propane ran out. How long would it take for the pipes to freeze? What kind of damage would that cause? Could I even stay in the house safely? Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of cold that felt personal, like nature itself was trying to kill you. -15 degrees, with wind chills hitting -35. I called in sick to work. There was no way I was leaving the house in this weather unless I absolutely had to. Around 10 in the morning, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Deborah standing there, bundled in a long down coat, her face pinched with cold despite the scarf wrapped around it. "Mr. Xavier, I need to speak with you about an urgent matter." I let her in, more out of shock than politeness. She stood in my entryway, looking around with barely concealed judgment. "I'll get straight to the point," she said. Several residents have reported seeing unusual frost buildup on your exterior walls and windows. There's concern that you're not adequately heating your home, which could lead to frozen pipes that might burst and cause damage to neighboring properties. I stared at her. You cannot be serious. You banned my propane deliveries, and now you're here to complain that my house is cold. The two issues are separate. HOA covenants require residents to maintain their properties in a manner that doesn't create hazards for others. Frozen pipes that burst can cause water damage to adjacent homes. Then let me get a propane delivery. That's not possible given the current rules. Then what exactly do you expect me to do? Because I'm at 9% propane capacity right now. By tomorrow, I'll have none. And before you suggest space heaters, running enough to heat this house would probably start an electrical fire. For the first time, Deborah looked uncertain. Perhaps you could stay elsewhere until you make permanent alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements? Like what? Installing an entirely new heating system in the middle of winter. Do you have any idea what that would cost and how long it would take? That's not the board's concern. Something in me snapped. You know what? Get out. Get out of my house right now. Mr. Xavier, there's no need to be hostile. Get out or I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. You've made your position clear, now leave. Deborah drew herself up, offended. The board will be discussing this matter at an emergency meeting tonight. You'll be hearing from us. She turned and stalked out, slamming the door behind her. I immediately called Rachel, my lawyer. They can't force you to leave your home, she said after I explained the situation. And if they try to fine you for having frozen pipes when they're the ones who prevented you from getting fuel to heat your home, that's actually good for our case. It shows how unreasonable this rule is. Rachel, I don't care about the case anymore. I care about not freezing to death or having my house destroyed. I understand. Look, let me make some calls. There might be an emergency provision we can invoke. Give me a few hours. Those few hours were some of the longest of my life. I watched the propane gauge needle sit at 9%, listened to the furnace kick on and off, felt the temperature in the house slowly dropping despite the furnace's efforts. Outside, the daylight faded early, the way it does in Minnesota in December, and the temperature dropped along with it. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Rachel. Okay, I've got something. I contacted the city's code enforcement office. Turns out there are minimum heating requirements for occupied dwellings. If your house drops below 58 degrees due to the HOA preventing you from accessing heating fuel, they're potentially liable. I also spoke with someone at the county attorney's office. They're very interested in this situation. Interested how? Interested in the sense that an HOA creating a situation that could lead to serious harm to residents during extreme weather could constitute reckless endangerment. It's a stretch, but they're willing to look into it. So what do I do? Document the temperature in your house. Multiple rooms, multiple times a day. Keep tracking your propane levels. And most importantly, if it gets dangerous, get out. No house is worth your life, but document everything before you go. That evening, the temperature outside hit -18 degrees. Inside my house, despite the furnace running constantly and me lowering the thermostat to 58 to conserve propane, the actual temperature in most rooms was hovering around 60. The propane gauge reads 7%. I set up thermometers in different rooms and took photos every hour, making sure the timestamps were visible. I also took video of my propane gauge and the exterior temperature reading. Around 8 at night, my phone rang. It was Frank Johnson. "Kevin, I'm out of propane," he said, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "Ran out about an hour ago. House is already down to 55 degrees. My wife has asthma, and we can't stay here in the cold. We're packing up to go to my daughter's place in Edna. But I wanted to warn you, you're probably right behind me. I've got maybe a day left, if that. This is insane. I've lived in Minnesota my whole life, and I've never felt as scared about the cold as I do right now. And it's all because of that woman and her stupid power trip. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, wearing thermal underwear, sweatpants, a sweatshirt, and a winter coat, and thought about what to do. I could leave, go to a hotel. But this was my home, and the idea of abandoning it because of an HOA rule made me furious. Around 9:30, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jennifer, the board member who'd voted against the propane ban, standing there looking nervous. "Can I come in? I promise this isn't official board business." I let her in, curious despite myself. "I just came from the emergency board meeting," she said. "Deborah called it to discuss the frozen pipe situation. Kevin, she's doubling down. She wants to start fining anyone whose house shows signs of inadequate heating. She's talking about it like it's a property maintenance issue, completely ignoring that it's her rule that caused this situation. That's insane." I know. I tried to argue that we should suspend the commercial vehicle rule, at least temporarily, given the extreme weather. Patricia actually agreed with me. So did Marcus once he realized the potential liability issues. But Deborah and Richard outvoted us, 2-3. So the rule stays. For now. But here's the thing. I've been on the phone with several residents tonight. A lot of people are angry about this, even people who don't use propane. They're seeing this as the board overreaching. There's talk of a recall election for Deborah's position. That takes time though, doesn't it? Normally, yes. But I looked into it. If we can get 30% of homeowners to sign a recall petition, we can trigger a special election that has to happen within 30 days. And if a majority votes to recall, she's out immediately, and we can appoint a replacement who will vote to suspend this rule. Even if we start tomorrow, that's still 30 days. The cold snap is happening now. Jennifer bit her lip. I know. That's why I'm here to tell you that if you need to do what you need to do to stay safe, do it. If a propane truck shows up at your house, I'll vote against any fines. That won't stop them from passing with the other 3 votes, but at least you'll have a board member on record opposing it. I appreciate that, but my propane company won't deliver. They're worried about liability. Then maybe it's time to find a company that will. There are smaller operators, independent guys. They might be willing to help. After Jennifer left, I spent an hour calling every propane company I could find in the Minneapolis area. Most gave me the same answer. They couldn't knowingly violate HOA rules. But finally, I found a small operation called North Star Propane, run by a guy named Dale. "Let me get this straight," Dale said after I explained the situation. "Your HOA banned propane deliveries, and now you're about to run out of heat in negative 20-degree weather." "That's exactly right. And you've got this documented. The weather, your propane levels, the HOA's position. Every detail." Dale was quiet for a moment. "Okay, here's what I think. What your HOA is doing is dangerous and probably illegal. I'm not a lawyer, but I know propane, and I know you can't just cut off someone's heat source in a Minnesota winter. I'll make the delivery, but I want something from you. Name it. I want you to sign a statement that you requested this delivery for emergency purposes, due to dangerous weather conditions and lack of heating alternatives. That protects me if this goes to court. And I'm going to charge you extra, not because I'm trying to take advantage, but because I'll probably get fined or have legal costs from your HOA." "How much extra?" "Double the normal rate. I know it's steep, but I'll pay it. When can you come?" "Tomorrow morning, first thing." I'll have to come from our facility in Shakopee, so probably around 8. Will that work? That'll work perfectly. I hung up feeling a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. I'd have heat. I'd make it through this cold snap. And if the HOA wanted to fight about it, fine. Let them try to justify cutting off someone's heat in life-threatening weather conditions. That night, the temperature outside dropped to negative 22 degrees. Inside my house, despite the furnace running constantly, the temperature dropped to 58 degrees. I wore every warm piece of clothing I owned and slept under 3 blankets, but I still woke up several times, shivering. Wednesday morning arrived gray and brutally cold. Negative 24 degrees when I woke up at 7. My propane gauge read 5%. The furnace was still running, but I could tell it was struggling. The air coming from the vents felt lukewarm rather than hot. At 8:15, a white propane truck with North Star Propane painted on the side pulled into my driveway. I met Dale at the door. He was a big guy, maybe 60, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Let's get you filled up," he said. "House feels cold even from here." As Dale worked on filling my tank, I saw curtains twitching in nearby houses. People were watching. Within 10 minutes, my phone started ringing. "Deborah." I answered. "Hello, Mr. Xavier, there is a propane truck in your driveway. You are in direct violation of HOA rules. This will result in a $200 fine." "Deborah, it's negative 24 degrees outside. My propane was down to 5%. I had no choice." "You had the choice to make alternative arrangements or to temporarily relocate. You chose to violate the rules instead. The fine will be added to your HOA dues. You do what you have to do. I'm keeping my heat. This isn't over, Mr. Xavier." "I really hope it isn't, because I'm looking forward to explaining to a judge why you thought it was appropriate to cut off someone's heat during the worst cold snap in years." She hung up. Dale finished the delivery, and I paid him in cash, wincing at the total but grateful for the service. As his truck pulled away, I went inside and felt the furnace kick on with renewed vigor, hot air finally flowing properly from the vents again. The relief was immense, but I knew this was far from over. By noon, I received a formal letter from the HOA, emailed and also left in my mailbox, notifying me of the $200 fine and warning that any future violations would result in additional fines of $500 per occurrence. The letter was coldly formal, citing the specific covenant I'd violated and giving me 30 days to pay. I forwarded it to Rachel, my lawyer. "Perfect," she said when she called me back. "This is exactly what we need." They've now created a clear record of prioritizing an arbitrary rule over resident safety during a weather emergency. I'm going to draft a response, and I'm also going to reach out to some local media. This is the kind of story they love. Media, trust me. Nothing makes an HOA back down faster than bad publicity. Give me a day. That evening, the temperature was still negative 18 degrees, but my house was warm, properly warm for the first time in days. I sat in my living room, finally able to relax without wearing a winter coat indoors, and tried to process everything that had happened. Thursday morning, I woke to my phone buzzing with notifications. Rachel had been busy. The story had been picked up by a local news blog, and from there, it had spread to one of the major Twin Cities news stations. The headline read, "Bloomington HOA bans propane deliveries, leaving residents without heat during dangerous cold snap." The article was detailed, quoting me, Frank Johnson, and Jennifer from the board. It also included comments from propane safety experts and a housing attorney who called the HOA's action shockingly irresponsible. Most damningly, It included temperature records showing the extreme cold and a photo of my propane gauge at 5%. By noon, 2 TV news stations had contacted me asking for interviews. Rachel advised me to do them. "Public pressure is our best tool right now," she said. "The more people who see how unreasonable this is, the harder it'll be for the HOA to maintain their position." I did both interviews that afternoon. The reporters were sympathetic, clearly viewing this as a story about bureaucratic overreach endangering residents. They filmed my propane tank, my thermostat, and the outside temperature reading. One reporter even got a comment from Deborah, who looked pinched and defensive on camera. "The board has a responsibility to enforce our community covenants," she said. "We can't make exceptions just because some residents find the rules inconvenient." "But isn't cutting off someone's heat during life-threatening weather more than an inconvenience?" the reporter pressed. "No one cut off anyone's heat. Residents were free to make alternative arrangements." Such as? Deborah had clearly not thought that through. That's up to each individual homeowner to determine based on their specific circumstances. The news piece aired that evening, and it was damning. They juxtaposed Deborah's comments about inconvenience with footage of the negative 20-degree temperatures and quotes from experts about the dangers of extreme cold. They also included a brief interview with Frank Johnson, who looked directly at the camera and said, "I'm 73 years old and my wife has health problems. We had to abandon our home because the HOA wouldn't let us get propane. That's not right." The response was immediate. By the next morning, the HOA's Facebook page, which Deborah maintained, was flooded with angry comments from both residents and outsiders. People were calling for the board to resign, for the rule to be overturned, and for Deborah specifically to be removed from her position. More importantly for me, several lawyers reached out offering to help with my case pro bono, seeing it as an example of HOA overreach that needed to be challenged. And a local city council member announced she was looking into whether the HOA's actions violated any city ordinances regarding minimum heating standards. Friday morning, I received a call from Patricia, the HOA secretary. "Kevin, I wanted to reach out personally. I'm resigning from the board, effective immediately. I can't be part of this anymore. What Deborah did was wrong and I should have fought harder against it. I'm sorry." "I appreciate that, Patricia. There's something else you should know. Marcus called me this morning. He's resigning too. He's worried about personal liability if someone gets hurt, or if there's property damage from frozen pipes. That leaves only 3 board members, which means they don't have a quorum to conduct official business." "What does that mean practically?" "It means they can't vote on anything or enforce any rules until new board members are appointed or elected. And under our bylaws, if the board can't function, residents can petition for an emergency general meeting to reconstitute the board. I think you should do that." I thanked Patricia and immediately called Rachel with this information. "That's huge," she said. "With no functioning board, the HOA essentially can't enforce any rules right now, and if you call an emergency meeting, you can push for a vote to overturn the propane ban entirely." I spent Friday organizing exactly that. With Jennifer's help, we drafted a notice for an emergency general meeting, to be held on Sunday afternoon. We needed 20% of homeowners to request the meeting, which we got in about 3 hours thanks to the media coverage. People were angry and wanted action. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Sunday at the community center. The turnout was massive. Over 100 homeowners showed up in a community of about 250 homes. The room was packed, with people standing along the walls. Since there was no functioning board, Jennifer, as the remaining board member present, called the meeting to order. Deborah and Richard were both notably absent. "Thank you all for coming," Jennifer said. "We're here to address the propane delivery ban and related issues. But first, we need to establish a temporary board so we can conduct official business. I'm opening the floor for nominations." Several people were quickly nominated, including me, Frank Johnson, and 3 other long-time residents known for being reasonable and community-minded. We were voted in unanimously, forming a temporary emergency board. The first order of business was the propane ban. I move that we immediately overturn the restriction on propane delivery vehicles, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my anger at having to do this at all. "Seconded," Frank said immediately. "All in favor?" Every hand in the room went up, not a single person opposed. The motion passes. The propane delivery ban is overturned effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Several people came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. But we weren't done. "Second order of business," I continued. "Given the events of the past week, I think we need to discuss whether the previous board's actions warrant further action." This opened a longer discussion. Many residents were calling for Deborah to be banned from ever serving on the board again. Others wanted financial accountability, arguing that the HOA should have to reimburse me and Frank for the extra costs we'd incurred. Eventually, we agreed on several actions. Deborah and Richard would be formally censured, with a recommendation that they not be considered for any board positions in the future. The HOA would reimburse me for the extra cost of my emergency propane delivery and would cover Frank's hotel costs. And we would conduct a full review of all HOA rules to identify and eliminate other provisions that were overly restrictive or unreasonable. We also voted to file a formal complaint with the Minnesota Attorney General's office about the previous board's actions, asking them to investigate whether HOA reform legislation might be needed to prevent similar situations in the future. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours, but by the end, I felt like we'd accomplished something real. The community had come together, rejected the petty tyranny that had taken hold, and established a better path forward. As people were leaving, an older woman I didn't know approached me. "Mr. Xavier, I just wanted to thank you. I don't use propane, so this didn't affect me directly. But watching you stand up to the board, even when it would have been easier to just give in, that meant something. We need more people willing to fight back against nonsense." Monday morning, I woke to a house that was properly warm, with a full propane tank, and the knowledge that I could get deliveries whenever I needed them without interference. The temperature outside was still well below zero, -8 degrees, but inside I was comfortable. I got a call from Rachel around 10. "You're not going to believe this," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "The Minnesota Attorney General's office called me. They're opening an investigation into Deborah Simmons and the previous board." Apparently, several other residents filed complaints, not just about the propane issue but about other actions the board took. There's some evidence that Deborah might have been receiving kickbacks from the electrical contractors she was referring people to. Kickbacks. That's what they're investigating. If it's true, that's fraud. She could face criminal charges. Wow. Yeah, they asked if you'd be willing to provide testimony and documentation, which I said you would. This could turn into something much bigger than just your propane situation. Over the next few weeks, the story continued to develop. The Attorney General's investigation uncovered that Deborah had indeed been receiving payments from an electrical contractor, essentially in exchange for steering business his way by making propane use difficult. She'd also apparently approved several HOA expenditures that benefited businesses owned by her friends and family. all without properly disclosing the conflicts of interest. In early January, Deborah was charged with fraud and misconduct in office. Richard, the vice president, was charged as well, as he'd known about and participated in some of these schemes. Both faced potential fines and jail time. The story had grown beyond our small community, becoming part of a larger conversation about HOA reform in Minnesota. State legislators introduced a bill that would limit HOA's ability to restrict access to utilities and would require boards to conduct impact assessments before implementing rules that could affect resident health or safety. For me personally, things settled into a comfortable routine. The new board, which I remained part of for the time being, focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. We repaved some roads, upgraded the community center, and revised the HOA covenants to eliminate the most problematic provisions. My propane deliveries continued without incident, and I never had another issue with heating my home. Frank and his wife moved back into their house, and the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though with a much more engaged and informed resident base. In February, Deborah pled guilty to 2 counts of fraud. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, suspended, 2 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and to affected residents. Richard accepted a plea deal that involved probation and fines but no jail time. The experience changed how I viewed homeowner associations and community governance in general. I'd always been someone who avoided getting involved in neighborhood politics, preferring to just live my life and not make waves. But I learned that sometimes you have to stand up and fight, especially when the alternative is accepting something genuinely wrong or dangerous. The other lesson I took from this was about the importance of community. When I first faced the propane ban, I felt isolated, like I was fighting alone against an indifferent bureaucracy. But once other residents understood what was happening, they rallied together. People who had nothing to gain personally still showed up to support what was right. By March, as the weather finally started to warm and spring seemed at least theoretically possible again, life in Meadowbrook Estates had found a new equilibrium. We had a functional board that actually served the community rather than ruling it. We had clear, reasonable rules that people could follow without feeling oppressed. And we had a much more engaged resident base that paid attention to what the board was doing. I eventually stepped down from the board, feeling I'd done my part. Jennifer became the new president, and under her leadership, the community thrived. We never forgot what happened that winter, though. It became a story told to new residents, a cautionary tale about the importance of reasonable governance and the dangers of giving too much power to people who abuse it. One afternoon in late March, I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the first genuinely warm day of the year when a propane truck from Midwest Propane pulled into my driveway. Tom, the driver I'd spoken to all those months ago, hopped out with a wave. "Figured you might be due for a delivery," he called out. "Right on schedule," I said. As he hooked up the hose to my tank, he looked over at the house. "You know, your story made quite the rounds in the propane industry. We use it in training now as an example of the kinds of obstacles drivers and customers might face and how to handle them. Glad something good came out of it. More than just something. That bill that passed in the legislature, the one limiting what HOAs can restrict. That's going to help a lot of people. You made a real difference." After he left, I sat back down on my porch and thought about that. I hadn't set out to make a difference or become some kind of HOA reform activist. I just wanted to heat my home, but sometimes that's how change happens. Someone faces an injustice, refuses to accept it, and in fighting for themselves, ends up helping others too. The propane tank was full, the house was warm, and spring was coming. Life was good, and I never took any of it for granted again.